and welcome to Diverse and Inclusive Leaders, the show where I interview the most inspirational and thought-provoking leaders of today and unearth their unique stories of diversity and inclusion to help inspire, educate, and motivate others to make the world a better place. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by the fantastic Simon Fillery. Simon has had a wealth of experience within the corporate world, but also within health and well-being. He is a passionate inclusion leader with over a decade's worth of experience directing diversity, well-being, and community initiatives. He's able to build strong interpersonal relationships from board level through to volunteer and grassroots level, and is driven to execute at the highest possible standards. He's developed and embedded inclusion strategies from both the private and the public sector and impacted engaging positively colleagues, customers and stakeholders. And, of course, very, very important today, given the pandemic that is the coronavirus, for us to be talking about inclusion and wellbeing. So we're going to be touching on that as well. But before we do that, and Simon, welcome to the show.
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me, Leila.
Thank you very much for being here. Before we dive into some of the current affairs, I would love for you to share, Simon, with some of our listeners a little bit about you and some of the current projects and how you came to be where you are today. Because I know that you're dovetailing a lot of work with businesses such as GSK and wider businesses, through your health, well-being and inclusion practices.
So thank you for that, Leila, and thank you for the lovely introduction there. So I've been working now in diversity and inclusion for just over a decade. My background has really been in financial services, and that's where I grew up. I was working for investment banks in banking operations for many, many years. And really my career is two halves. That first part was very much focused around managing and looking after operational processes. But when I was doing those roles, I never really felt quite as fulfilled as about what I wanted to try and do with my life. I started to get involved with diversity and inclusion. I helped to set up an employee resource group at Barclays back in 2004, something like that. And I loved it. It was great. It really, really helped me, I think, to try and keep the lights on when I wasn't really enjoying my day-to-day role. And actually, who knew that actually 15 years later I'd be sat here and actually diversity and inclusion would really be the focus of the work that I'm doing full time. So really I started my career, as I said, going through many different investment banks. I worked at Citibank, I worked at Merrill Lynch, I worked at Barclays. And then at Barclays, I managed to make the move into HR and started off working in development and then moved into diversity and inclusion. Ended up leading their work for the investment bank through the financial crisis. And then left there, went to the Bank of England, was the first person really be brought in at my level to the bank and helped to set up what we called the inclusion agenda, which brought together all the work that we were doing around diversity and inclusion, around philanthropy and charity work and well-being. And there are some really great synergy points we found between those. Very proud of the work that I managed to do with the bank, but about 18 months ago, decided to set up my own diversity and inclusion practice, and really have been focusing on that inclusion work ever since, and been working very closely with a number of different groups, but particularly with GSK over the last year. And at the moment, we are now looking. We've successfully set up our strategy around what we call modern employer at GSK for the UK, and we're now looking at trying to see how we can try and embed that, particularly in these troubling times.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. And for those of us who don't know, who are listening in today, what exactly is modern employment?
So modern employer is basically a strategy that's been launched by GSK. It's quite specific to the organisation, and it has three pillars. The first is around diversity and inclusion, and they've called it BU. So it's about trying to ensure that everybody can be themselves in the workplace and they can really bring their full selves to work. The second part is around feeling good. So basically, this is the health and well-being element. So it's about making sure that people's mental and physical health are really well looked after within the organisation. And again, people can be themselves and actually be able to be as productive as they possibly can. And then the final piece is keep growing, which is really around development in its broadest sense. So everything from volunteering for charities and getting involved with the community through to your traditional learning and development offering.
Mm-hmm. And I think number 2 there to touch on briefly is feeling good. Mental and physical health is absolutely critical given the state of affairs that we are in the UK and worldwide, of course, with coronavirus or COVID-19. Talk to me a little about what you've seen within the market so far, Simon, and and also, are there any tips and tricks and strategies that we can be implementing given this unprecedented time of self-isolation?
So it's going to be really interesting to see how things pan out. Certainly, I've been doing some really interesting work around, really around flexible working and actually how you can make flexible working work. And now I think that those lessons, I think, were things that we all need to really start to be thinking about. So if I start with that, and then I'll move on to the mental health piece.
Yes.
So thinking about flexible working and making it work and actually making it as easy as possible, having those conversations within teams about how you're going to work, what are the ways that you're going to be able to try and make sure you keep in contact. Thinking about some of those social contacts as well. So one of the things that I've been doing, and I know colleagues have been doing as well, is setting up virtual lunches, virtual coffees. I even had a virtual party on Friday night with some friends. So basically, we use WhatsApp to just to have a little drink and have a chat with each other, and just really be there to try and support each other. I think technology now is really going to be coming into its own. So thinking about how you can try and make sure you're reaching out to people. I think one of the things as a watch out is to try and, from an inclusion perspective, is to think about those people that you're not actually hearing from, making sure that you're reaching out to those, and particularly those that are really vulnerable at the moment. I've got a couple of friends that at the moment that are going through cancer treatments, and they are now going to be isolated for the next 12 weeks. So thinking about how the healthy people can try and be able to try and help and support people is going to be something that's going to be really, really crucial. And at a corporate level, we are really looking at a whole, so from a GSK perspective, certainly looking at all the different aspects and tools that are already out there within the organisation to be able to try and help and support. But from a public perspective, there are a vast number of resources that are out there can be able to try and help and support people. So I think for organisations that have resources, make sure you publicise them. Make sure you share how people can access things like your employee assistance program, if you've got online learning tools. And if you don't have those resources, there are other ways to be able to try and access things that are out there that can help and support. I know Audible, for example, has started to share information. They are making all their publications available for children. So parents that are going to be at home now and they're going to have kids running around and potentially they're going to need to be trying to look after them and work at the same time. Audible's made all their stories available, so they're all free for kids to be able to try and do. So I think there are numbers of different things that are out there, and organisations are being quite thoughtful about how they can try and help and share.
You're absolutely right. And I have to say, that is the one silver lining to this terrible cloud, really, is that actually, we are seeing people come together, and we are seeing the generosity that businesses and people alike are actually willing, to share with others. The Audible example is a fantastic one. I'm a huge fan of Audible. I absolutely love it. And of course, podcasts and things like this, a great way to kind of keep people occupied and entertained during these times of trouble. But you mentioned some fantastic points there, which again, as always, will be kind of in the show notes at the end of today's podcast. But there's some brilliant kind of tips and tricks that we can be using. Least of all, kind of the virtual party, which, oh my goodness, that is fantastic. It's so funny, actually, because one of my very best friends, actually, She FaceTimed me yesterday and she said,
Right.
let's have a virtual party because all of the things that we have, you know, had to cancel, you know, actually you could do a great party on Zoom, you know, with your nibbles and your drinks, you know, your virtual martinis and whatnot. It's kind of, you know, in a way, the opportunities are limitless, and maybe we can be connecting with people who are across the other side of the world that maybe we would be speaking with perhaps less.
Yeah, I sort of hope that actually some of this stuff would actually start to stick. And actually, if I think about my family, it's very dispersed. I've got family in the States and in Canada. Actually, there's a real opportunity for us to be able to try and do things a bit differently and actually start to have more family parties, virtual family parties, which is something we haven't ever done. So something that's starting to plan. So hopefully there'll be some positives out of this, but I don't think we can underestimate actually the impact when you look at the learnings that are coming out from China and from Italy around self-isolation, and actually particularly for people who are living on their own, actually thinking about their mental and physical well-being is going to be really, really important. So thinking about what are the things that you can try and do to try and keep your own mental health up. So thinking about things like meditation or yoga or things that actually can take your mind away from what you're doing. Trying to avoid the news is going to be something that's going to be really, really crucial. And then on top of that, physical activity, whatever you can do to try and keep your physical activity up. Because if you're like me, at the moment I'm staring at a packet of crisps. And I'm like, oh my god, I want to eat that packet of crisps. I can't be eating that packet of crisps all the time. So I need to make sure that I'm balancing that out and getting a bit of a yin and a yang when it comes to the way that I'm living.
Oh my goodness, I know, and it's easy to fall into that trap. I mean, I have to say, I've been doing a lot more baking, which you know, I suppose on the one hand is great, but on the other hand, my husband has not thanked me because his waistline is vastly increasing, as is mine as well. So yes, getting out when we can is absolutely critical, as you said, and sometimes avoiding the news as well, because I think you know, the thing about the news, as critical as it is, it's kind of you know, almost a self-perpetuating cycle of you know, not only despair but panic, and you know, of course you see all the panic buying and everything like this in shops, which is just really, really sad, because you think, well, you know, we must yes, we must look after ourselves, but we also must make sure that we're not over consuming, you know, in order you know, to kind of, you know, satisfy needs that almost don't exist. Because and there's a very, very sad piece on the news, which you know, again, perhaps should have avoided the news a little more, but there was a nurse who had done 48 hours looking after you know, patients and whatnot, and was in tears, and had been into the supermarket and all of the shelves been stripped of any fresh fruit and vegetables and things like that. And you kind of think, you know, come on people, we must pull together as a nation here and kind of really you know, just ration ourselves and not panic buying.
Exactly. And I think actually corporations can try and help here as well in making sure that we're reinforcing the messages about making sure people are staying home. Certainly, I think one of the things that really bugged me yesterday was seeing people out on the beach and treating it like a bank holiday. And actually, this isn't a holiday. This is a really serious public health announcement and really a public health crisis that we need to be able to try and address. And people ignoring the government's advice at the moment is just selfish. It really is.
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. Yes, we do need to get out and about, but at the same time, you know, the more that we continue to do this, the more it is going to get worse. You know, it really is. We need to, you know, use this time now to be creative and innovative when it comes to being inclusive. And I know you and I spoke just before the podcast started and talked about the fact that actually D&I might be one of those things that almost goes to the back burner, when actually it is now indeed that we must put inclusion at the absolute forefront of what we are doing, you know. So, you know, and talk to me, I know we are repeating ourselves a little here from our conversation, but why do we need to put inclusion at the forefront of what we're doing, especially in times of crisis right now, Simon?
So if you think about the central tenets of unconscious bias, which is one of the real drivers of people being excluded, and what has driven some of the bad behavior that you've seen before, what drives that is the way that your brain works. Your brain is hardwired by the experiences that you've had in the past, by your peer group, by your socialization. And if you don't try and think about how to try and combat that, you'll just go to the quickest and easiest routes. Most of the time, that's fine. But at the moment, when people are in crisis, people will keep on going to those easy routes. And it means that actually we might miss some of those some of those pieces that will help us to try and make better decisions. So thinking about when you are in a decision making, particularly if you're a leader at the moment and you're making decisions on behalf of an organization, just stop and make sure that you are listening to all voices that are out there that can try and help to inform that decision making before you leap to making a decision that actually your gut is telling you to try and do. Because there may be something you're missing, and actually you may make the wrong decision. So I think just taking a pause before you hit the button and make a decision for the whole organisation or for a particular team is going to be super crucial. And coming back to the point I was talking to you before about making sure you're listening to those voices that are out there, not just the ones that are shouting loudest. So when you've got a team meeting, people have got a lot of stuff that's going on at the moment. They will have their own personal issues, and you may see some different behaviours from people because they've got to try and balance what's going on in their home and their personal life as well as what's going on in their work life. Making sure that as a leader or as a manager of a team, you're reaching out to those people as well, just to make sure that their voices are being heard. It's going to be super crucial. I know it's going to take time and effort to do it, but it's going to be really worthwhile, and it will pay dividends in the long.
I couldn't agree with you more. Listening to those voices who are often the quietest, because it's easy for everyone to hear that person who is shouting the loudest. And even now, when people are, ultimately self-isolating at home, for those who are vulnerable, it's so much worse. And so, as you said, for leaders now, not only one, think about hitting the pause button before you make decisions, but two, this is a time where leaders need to be stepping up to the plate and really demonstrating that they are including every single person, because I do, personally fear a lot for the nation's mental health in specific, because we know that depression and loneliness and things like this are, they're an absolute killer. And now when people are going to be by themselves and having self-isolate because they're more vulnerable, we really need to make sure we are addressing every single person around that virtual boardroom and around that kind of that virtual table almost, so to speak. So no, I absolutely concur, Simon.
Yeah, exactly. And I think going even further than that now, actually, I think that there is a real risk of the most vulnerable people in society really being excluded and really being left behind, whether it's people who are sick and not being able to try and get out, or elderly, or even the homeless and the people from food banks. I really feel for those folks at the moment. And actually, there is more to be done. And actually, as a society, we will be judged about how we treat the people who are the most vulnerable. And we need to think about how we want to be viewed in the future.
Absolutely. And before we whip into our lightning round and run out of time for today, Simon, I wanted to just quickly ask you, because I know that today's conversation, of course, critically has been dominated by, what we can do about the coronavirus. But I just wanted to ask you, because I know that you have, done some really fantastic pieces around kind of metrics and transparency when it comes to driving inclusion. And I guess this is a time where, of course, almost, I dare say metrics are more important than ever, but at the same time, half kind of going out the window because, of course, thinking about the critical time. But, you've talked a lot in the past, I know, about kind of metrics and transparency and how important that is to drive inclusion. Can you talk to me very briefly about that before we go into our lightning round for today?
Yes, of course. So certainly it was something I was very proud of the work we did with the Bank of England. One of the bank's key ambitions really was to be transparent, as transparent as it could. So we went for full transparency, where we started to publish all the data around our gender and ethnicity, hiring, promotion, attrition rates by department. We put it all in our annual report. And what we did, though, with that data then was to sit down with businesses to then sit down and plan, what are they going to do? So all metrics are telling you that you need to try and focus on a particular area. So one area that we were really suffering was attrition for people from ethnic minorities, or BAME. And actually, what we found was, by sitting down with businesses and asking them to try and focus on this, we managed to reduce an attrition rate that was almost double the non-white. The white population was the BAME attrition rate was double the white attrition rate. What we managed to do is bring that BAME attrition rate down to below that, the white attrition rate. So we had a really positive impact by being able to try and focus on that data. And actually, as an organisation, being able to have open conversations about what those metrics actually were really helped to be able to try and drive.
That is fantastic. That is fantastic. And I've heard this actually quite a lot that, you know, especially within, I won't actually name a consultancy here, but there's consultancy, you know, global business that was losing very specifically young Black males. And, you know, was wondering what to do about it actually. But fortunately, the data had honed in and allowed them to actually pluck out those specific individuals and learn that it was them that were kind of not lasting too long, you know, within that kind of layer of almost mid-management and also grassroots. So how did you actually manage to, you know, halve the attrition rate? Because that's a real achievement, Simon.
Well, so I think that there's a number of different issues, and actually it would vary between the different departments, but really it was a matter of actually trying to understand what the reasons were within those specific areas, and actually it was different between the businesses. So actually there wasn't like a blanket answer across the board that was something that was going to be able to try and help. It was, for me, it was about actually the key thing was about having the organisation focused on it, people being able to talk about it openly, and actually there was no secrecy from an HR perspective around data. And actually then we managed to sit down with our employee resource group and start to co-create what some of the answers were there. So there's no magic answers to it, but what it meant is actually you could focus on the area that was really going to have the biggest impact. And
Excellent.
it really did. We've seen the Bank of England's numbers now for ethnic minorities go up from around 13 or 14% up to almost 20% of representation, which is great.
Which is brilliant. And as with everything when it comes to diversity, inclusion and belonging, there never is one silver bullet. And people say to me, okay, what's the key? How can we improve diversity and inclusion? It's like, well, hello, you know, there are a number of different facets to this. It's not a one size fits all. And like you quite rightly said, and I suspected you may say that, is that everyone is an individual. So we can't kind of sit there and say, oh, because the Bank of England, as an example, is losing Chinese females, or you know, Barclays is losing young Black males. There must be a one-size-fits-all answer, because we're all very different individuals, and we all have our own intersectionalities and many different identities and such like. So thank you for sharing. And Simon, before we wrap up for today, because I could actually sit here and chat to you for a very long time, and I'm conscious of time because we have actually gone slightly over, but it's not to worry. I just wanted to whip into the lightning rounds. I know that you listen to the podcast, so you know what is coming. But tell me, what is your secret to success?
My secret to success, I think, really is to try and make sure you take advantage of every opportunity that comes forward. Make sure that actually you, absolutely grab every opportunity with both hands. You never know where it's going to lead. Make sure you do it. And sometimes it will take you in very different directions from where you think you're going to go. And I absolutely love that.
So say yes.
Yes.
Say yes to everything. Within reason. Within reason, absolutely. Yes, within reason. Exactly. And what advice might you give to the young Simon if you were to be able to zoom back in time and give the young Simon some advice before he jumped up onto that corporate career ladder?
I think be more confident in who you are. Go after what you want in life, and be kinder to yourself when you fail, because we all fail, and that's really where you learn.
I really agree with that. And it is hard because, you know, we're all fearful of failure, aren't we? But yes, now more than ever, being kind is critical. But
accepting that failure is just part of life, and actually you learn from it. And then if I think about where I've learned the most, it's when I failed. I've learned the most about myself and about how to try and succeed in the future.
And what about authentic leadership? What is authentic leadership to you?
For me, being inclusive is absolutely crucial, and making sure you're listening to all the voices around there, owning your decisions, taking responsibility, and being really honest and authentic about your own weaknesses and where you failed. I think that the failure thing for me, I think, is something we don't talk about enough in our society.
And who has inspired you most throughout your career, or indeed your life?
So I've been really lucky in my career. I've had some great mentors and managers who've really helped to inspire me and motivate me and give me the inspiration to try and move on. I particularly had one guy who I used to co-chair our LGBT network with at Barclays, who encouraged me to move into HR from operations. And I will always thank Steve Preston. I'll give him a quick shout out for that. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you, Steve. And then the other person I think I'd like to call out is probably my mum and my dad, but particularly my mum. She's the one who really instilled in me the sense of equality and thinking about treating people fairly, and a similar sense of if people aren't being treated fairly, to try and do something about it. And I think that's what's given me this core about the fact that actually diversity and inclusion for me at its heart is about giving everyone a fair opportunity to be able to try and succeed. And I think that's something that I was always stuck with me.
That's so lovely. And my mum is also a very big inspiration to me. I think it's lovely that you mentioned personal and also professional there. And finally, are there any kind of books or series or podcasts, other than this one, obviously, that you particularly are enjoying at the moment? And of course, what a time to be kind of, watching TV and listening to, consuming other pieces of, literature, fiction or non-fiction, as well.
Well, I have to say at the moment I'm probably avoiding fiction. I'm probably avoiding non-fiction. So I'm immersing myself in the worlds of fantasy and other worlds. So at the moment I'm listening to a fantastic book called The Doll Factory, actually on Audible as well. I'm loving my audio books at the moment. I think it really helps when you're going around the house and doing stuff. You can listen to a story. But The Doll Factory is a great story. It's sort of almost like a gothic story, but set in the mid-Victorian era. Loving that.
Wonderful, wonderful. And I think, like myself, you also enjoy The Handmaid's Tale.
Oh, I love The Handmaid's Tale. So both the TV series and the book. Very
dystopian. My goodness.
And actually, it's so appropriate for now. You're starting to see the government starting to step into spaces, and I'm like, oh my God, we're moving into a Gilead type scenario here. Like the government's taking lots of authority. So I think we just need to make sure we're keeping a check about what's happening. The last thing we want is that.
My goodness, absolutely. And it is, I have to say, it's one of my absolute favourites. And in fact, they postponed the third season because of the coronavirus. Indeed. But no, it's absolutely just such a brilliant series and really quite frightening. You're right. I mean, what could be more relevant than The Handmaid's Tale right now? It's it is absolutely that kind of this dystopian universe, but it's unfortunately one that you can almost kind of picture given the current circumstances. But anyhow, I shall leave this on a positive note and let you leave us, hopefully, Simon, with a word of wisdom and care for others who are listening in.
So I think for me at the moment, I think it's look after yourself. You can't look after anybody else if you don't look after yourself.
Mm-hmm.
But then also make sure you're thinking of others. So think about your mental and physical well-being, and how you're going to be able to try and keep that up over the long term, and whether you get joy from going out and taking a run, or whether you take joy from sitting and meditating in yoga, do something for yourself every day, and make sure you can try and keep this up.
Thank you so much for sharing, Simon. Thanks for being here as well. It's been highly, highly valuable.
Lovely. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Just a super quick summary, as I usually do, and I know there's been so many wonderful nuggets of wisdom from Simon here today, which has been absolutely brilliant. And I guess just to reshare a couple of them, but again, they'll all be in the show notes at the end of today's show. But to really look after yourself, and also for those who are just joining the career ladder, whether it be kind of the world of entrepreneurialism or whether it be the corporate world, be kind to yourself, and make sure you do heed advice from others. Make sure you're saying yes as well, because like Simon said, there really are so many opportunities there, and just by raising your hand and saying yes to something, you don't know where that is going to lead you and the path that might take you on. So do be brave and do kind of really be kind to yourself and try and seize as many opportunities as you possibly can. Clearly it's worked for Simon, so hopefully it can work for everyone else who's tuning into today's show. My name is Leila Mackenzie-Dellis, and you have been listening to Diverse and Inclusive Leaders, the podcast show, with you every week, and in fact with you more frequently because of the coronavirus. We want to try and give back here at Dial Global, so we are going to be launching more podcasts than usual. You can visit www.dialglobal.org/podcast or www.leilamckenzie.com/podcast, and all the show notes will be in the website at the end of today's show. And you can also visit or reach out to Simon, who I'm sure will be very happy to answer any of your questions or support when it comes to mental health, well-being, diversity, inclusion, and belonging. Thanks very much, and see you next week. Bye for now. Thank you so much for watching the Diverse and Inclusive Leaders podcast. Please do feel free to hit the like button below, or if you'd like to receive future notifications, do ping the notification bell here at the side. If you're interested in the audio version only, you can find it on the following streaming platforms. Any extra info and descriptions will be in the links below. Look forward to seeing you soon.